Welcome back to This Just In. I'm Justin Young,
And I'm Justin Meyer.
and we are
The
the
Justins.
Justins. So today's topic is going to be on leadership. Do you know anything about leadership, Justin?
I know a little bit about leadership.
I think so. If we really want to know what we do well and don't do well, you know who we should ask?
We should ask.
Our wives, our bosses. That's how you want to know. If you really want to know honest truth, you ask them. They'll tell you how you're doing. How about that?
I think that is true.
All right. So let's talk about leadership as a whole. What's your overall philosophy on leadership?
My overall philosophy on leadership has always been servant leadership. And I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with that term. But really, what that term comes down to is being willing to be with your people. Whether you are going in the back of a loading truck every once in a while, whether you're doing some of the behind the scenes work, that whatever it is that they see you present and in the moment with the job task that is at hand.
Yeah, it's I think you explained it. I think the simple part, the way to think about it is don't have anyone do anything you're not willing to do yourself. So, if it's a restaurant and the toilets need cleaned, are you willing to clean them? If you're not, then that's not fair. You're going to direct someone else to, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And Justin, you've known me obviously a long time, and I've come a long way in my leadership career. Generally, they say firstborns are kind of that natural born leader. So I am a firstborn. And you just take on some of those roles. You take on, taking care of your siblings or taking care of some of the family things. But when I first started out in leadership, I didn't realize how much you need to get to know people. And of course, if you've listened to some of our other shows, you know that I'm a pastor. So that means that I have, over the years, become more involved with people, not just with my own family, but with members of my church. And I carry that into my secular work as well. I really want to get to know people. If you're going to be an effective leader, I truly believe you need to know something about everybody that reports to you, and not just what they're good at with work.
Not topical, right? Like, you
Not
got to get into
topical.
something.
You need to know about their family. And of course, they're going to share it with you as they build a trust. And that's how you get people to respond when you need those extra hours, when you need that extra project. I'm telling you, other leaders that just try to bark out orders and try to do things, I have seen that. I have lived it. I have been around it, and it has never been effectual for me.
You know what I think gets really confusing sometimes about leadership is there are so many styles, and guess what? Some of those styles work. Some of those styles work for different people. So you talked about, people barking out orders, or, I would call it managing in fear. That works. It's not that it doesn't work, it works, but what is the long-term effectiveness of it? I think that's a big piece a lot of people miss. Is it might work for the short term, but eventually it's going to fail you at some point. I've been a firm believer of setting expectations and holding people accountable to those, and I think that's what you have to do, and that works on both sides, accountability in the good way. So if they do something good, you got to tell them. Leaders are really bad at that. It's hard
Really bad
to give good feedback and good representation, because in a leadership role, you're always looking for how can we be better, right? So first thing you click to is what could be better, not what you did really well. So celebrating those wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing with leadership too is that we have to really establish what we want to get out, or where we want the goal to be. And what we need to do with that is bring in a collaboration. So we talked about the barking out orders, and yeah, there are people, in the military and things like that lead in that way. But Justin, one thing that you've taught me is that you really get the opinions of those that are around you, that ultimately you're going to be that leader that has to make that last decision. But in order to lead the people, they need to have a voice. They need to be in there. They need to know that you care about what they want and what they see. And even though it may not go their way, or maybe wasn't that vision, because at the end of the day, the leader has to make that final decision. I love that collaboration of bringing people in. And that is something that, again, I believe I've seen you do throughout your entire career, and something you still do today.
Yeah, I think the thing is, in my career, when I was younger in my career, I didn't get a lot of time to weigh in on situations. It was decided at a higher level. And I didn't always think that was fair. And it frustrated me because a lot of those people didn't know what was going on the ground floor, right? So I try to really bring in the people that are on the ground floor that know it. I'll ask our leaders sometimes, go out, talk to your people, see what works, see what doesn't work. I try to be out in the field as much as possible, talking to our team members that are in it every day about what works and what doesn't work. And I think, am I a good leader? Sometimes I'm a bad leader. I think we all have our good and bad phases. And I sometimes talk about the frustration. Frustration weighs in sometimes pretty heavily, and it's hard to get past that. So, you got to fight through that sometimes. But Justin, I had a good question for you.
Okay.
I think you talked a little bit about your beliefs, right?
Yes.
And I share those as well. How do you separate those from your everyday life? You're a pastor on one hand,
Yes.
on the other hand, you have to be a leader in a business that might have those same beliefs at a leadership level, but at a lower level might be completely opposite.
That's a great question. I do want to say this before I answer that question, Justin. So, again, on that leadership career, one thing I've learned is that a leader, you do have to be organized. You need your leader to be organized. You need your leader to have a vision and understand what the end goal is while developing that team. But you asked a great question. So yes, I'm a leader not only in my home, I'm also a pastor, and in my role as a director, I am a leader. So when I do all of those things, I don't come in and I don't introduce myself to everybody that I meet. Hey, I'm Justin Meyer, pastor, because that may, I actually have to lead those people.
Might be off-putting, right?
It might be off-putting. Yeah. So I just live my life as I believe God would have me to live my life. I live my life with joy. I live my life with happiness. And then, Justin, I'm telling you, over the years, people will say, they have asked me time and time again, hey, something is different. And I'm not just saying that. A lot of you listening will be like, yeah, that's a catchphrase. Oh, yeah, everyone just says that. Woo. No, they really do. And then I'll share with them, I also pastor a church. I knew there was something. So because of the kind of leader that God has allowed me to be, I can be me without having to sacrifice anything else. And I can still show people what it is to be respectful and not, cursing at them and not doing all of those things that so many people don't like, bringing the company in the direction that it needs to go.
Yeah, I think
that makes sense.
It does. I think that's a tough one too, because, our goal as Christians is to lead for God, and our goal for leaders in a business is to lead for a company. And sometimes those interact together. Sometimes they contradict each other, right? So how do we make sure constantly we're doing that? And I think that's a tough one. Justin knows one of the things I like to do is I'll say, let's sleep on it. And the reason I do that is because sometimes making a harsh decision that when it doesn't have to be made right in that moment isn't the right time. You need to breathe. You need to sleep on it. You need to think about it and pray about it. I think people think firing people is really easy, or, making hard cuts or making hard decisions is simple because that person's not affected. And maybe that's true in lives, but I always take that very, very seriously every single time we have to impact someone's life, not only the business impact, but the person's life impact. And sometimes it has to happen, and we understand that. But how can we do our best as a leader and as a Christian leader to soften that blow and try to find something good to come out of it?
Absolutely. I want to encourage our Christian audience in that. I want to also say that being a leader and having to make those tough decisions, it doesn't make it easier that we are following God and that we are Christians and have to make those tough decisions. I think what it actually does is it allows us that side of empathy, and not just sympathy, but empathy. And I would encourage all of our listeners, if you have been thinking about becoming a leader, and if you are a Christian, I really, truly believe that we need more Christian leaders. Again, it's not about going out into the secular world and that you're always preaching a sermon to every single employee, but it is showing that love of Christ just by our day-to-day actions and effectively leading them in that way. But yeah, when those tough decisions come, they're still hard. We still have to respond. We still have to do it, but we can do it in a way that is as respectful as we can be. Now, Justin, I think you've had this in leadership. I think even as much as we hate making those decisions and as hard as those decisions are to make, people still will yell, people will still cuss, and we still have to navigate through that. And and I believe that we've been able to do that in our leadership career.
I think you brought up a good point too. I think in this scenario, a lot of people don't realize this. You can talk about this at 3 years old and 4 years old with kids, though, is how people react to things tell a lot about their character too, right? Because the way people act in the worst parts or times of their life really tells a true story about what their character is like overall. And I think sometimes, we get caught up in the midst of too many things or too many emotions. And again, this is why I really truly think walking away sometimes is the best version to gather your thoughts and put it together. If you have something to say, that's fine. Gather your thoughts before you say it, because sometimes you're going to say something that's inappropriate. And you might do that to your kids. You might do that to your wife. You might do that to a fellow brother. You might do that to one of your employees or team members too. And that one interaction can destroy 10 great interactions you've had.
Justin, you've said it. I am a firm believer. We live in a very technological age now. But you got to take that time to breathe before you hit that up on a text, before you hit enter in an email. Being a good leader is understanding that you need to understand a situation. You need to gather your facts before you just go off. And Justin, you said earlier too, we wear emotion on our sleeves. Anyone that knows me, anyone that may be listening that knows me, because we're going to try to get our friends and family to listen to these first, knows that I'm absolutely one of those guys that wears my emotion on my sleeves. I'll stone face, I'll get quiet, I'll disengage. And that's a weak spot in my leadership. That's something that I know I continually work on, and I have been getting better throughout the years, but you hit on that. But I would encourage everyone, you've got to take some time in all of life when we react, whether we're hitting send, whether we're saying something to our spouses or our children or our employees or our bosses, to take a moment before we hit send, before we hit that up arrow, and make sure that we are conveying the message in the way that we want it to be conveyed.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think about, I have little kids now, obviously, and I think about the little kids. I mean, they're so forgiving. They forgive us for all of our shortcomings, should I say. And I think if they didn't, they would want to leave us and wouldn't want to be with us all the time. I think the other thing that I struggle with sometimes is, I know you might not know this, but I'm sarcastic sometimes. And I, will add sarcasm to a lot of things. And if it's the right situation, that might be the way I'm dealing with it. But that's not good for other people because they might not be dealing with it that way. So, I really got to find the right time and right ways to be able to use that and do that. And I know, sometimes it's very serious, and sometimes that's just how I deal with it.
Yep. Yeah. I think, again, you said that too. I tend to go that way myself. I'm not saying that's the great quality or it's a good quality. Now, there's also a time in leadership that you got to lighten the mood. There is just a time for that, and a well-placed, funny story or a well-placed memory in a hot time, it'll go a long way with our teams.
You know what I think another big part is too? I learned this earlier in my career, but if you do not create a culture is created for you. And
that's exactly right.
And I think you got to think about, what does that really mean and how does that interact? So that means if you're overseeing something, it's just like a decision or non-decision, right? If you have a decision to make, a non-decision or decision is a decision. You've decided to either overlook that, or you've decided to do something and interject. Either way, people are always watching, right? So if you're walking by someone that has their earplugs in or earphones in and they're not supposed to, if you walk by them, you have accepted it's okay. And people have watched you say it's acceptable, that it's okay as well from that standpoint. So you've made a decision, even though you're making a non-decision there. And that can drive the culture really in a negative stance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Culture is huge, and setting that right culture, setting that right tone. And so that's what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. Being a Christian leader is a way to set the right tone in an organization that and allows us to have open conversation, honest communication with all of our employees at any given time. And that's what employees are really looking for. Treat me like a person, not like a number.
Well, the other part is you talked about it's open door policy,
That's
right? You see that
Always
on so many things, but it's usually not true. We have it at our company, and I guarantee there's people that say it's not true there, even though my phone number and name and email address is on every communication board in every store that we operate. And people do call and text me. It happens. Not everyone feels like they can, but what I always tell people first is you should always start with your manager, right? That's where you got to start. And then you can work your way up from there if you're not getting what you need or don't feel like it's being fair and consistent, of how a representation of a policy or whatever it may be. But as leaders, we also have to take the time to read those emails, read those texts, listen to those voicemails, and follow up with the person. Not following up is another thing I always hear people say, I'm busy, right? That's one that everybody uses. I'm too busy. I couldn't get to that. Well, guess what, buddy? Everyone is busy. So if your boss is telling you to do something, or something's on your list, it doesn't matter. If you have to do that at 9:00 at night, that's on you to do because you signed up to do that role.
Justin, this is going to be the last thing that I think I'm going to give right now, but you hit it again. Part of my leadership is I've always been a huge advocate of follow up and follow through. If somebody asks me a question, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer. I'm going to say that right away, and then I'm going to do the work in the background to get it. And I've heard feedback, because to grow as a leader, you have to be able to receive feedback. You have to get broad shoulders. You have to know some of your weaknesses. Justin has pointed some of those out to me before, and that's good. That's the only way that I can grow as a leader. And I've had others do that. But now I've come to this place where I've realized how important it is to follow up and follow through when somebody asks a question, to not forget about that communication that has come in. That is game-changing leadership, folks, is when you get back to the person that has asked you that question in a timely manner.
I agree. By the way, I don't only critique and criticize. No, I had to say that in there. Hopefully you guys take away from this podcast and learn. And if you have questions, send them in. Comment below whatever you're watching this or listening to this on. Would love to hear those. We'll try to follow up and follow through. But I think that's a big part. And guess what? If you follow up and follow through, then people trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I think that's a big piece, where a team member comes to you and says, hey, my PTO is not correct. And then you do nothing. Guess what? You've told them they're not important, right? That's not what you want to do.
That's that number as opposed to the person that I was talking about earlier. So follow up and follow through.
Absolutely. And I think the other part that gets confusing sometimes is, as you move up, people think that they set on this pillar and that they don't have to interact at that level. But guess what? The best CEOs and the best leaders of the world talk to every person 100%. At every level on every team at any given time, because that's how they're learning as much as they can about what's going on. And I think, strategy plays a big part into this. Culture is another big piece. When you hire, you need to hire the right person every time, and they need to be the right person for the culture. You really need to think about what it looks like to follow up and follow through in every single role. The old saying, basically, I'll do for you as you do for me. If I'm following through and following up and doing the things you ask, I'm going to expect the same thing from you.
100%.
But guess what? That becomes hard conversations, accountability. There's lots of pieces that go into that. Everyone's not a leader. A lot of times people just think Sally does a great job at doing this role. That means she's going to be a great leader. No, that doesn't. If Grandma was still here today, Grandma would tell you she didn't like telling people what to do. She liked to come to work and do her job.
And we need both. We need both of those.
You do.
We have to have both.
And they can be high performing in their own areas. You're not shoving a circle peg into a square hole or vice versa to try to make it work. Some people don't want to lead. They want to clock out. They want to work 9 to 5, and that's it.
And that's it.
That's great. Find out what they're good at and use that to your advantage.
Yeah. 100%, Justin.
I think, to wrap it up, things I would think about, and I won't tell you who instilled some of these into me, but if he ever listens to this, he'll probably get it. But I think there's a few things to think about, and these are simple ones that I use all the time. You may like them, you may hate them, I don't care. Tell us what you guys think about them. But I think number one I always think about is don't be a victim. And that means, listen, you have a chance in life to either be a victim or be a victor. And I would always choose the latter. Now, we all at some point play the victim, and we're all the victim at some point, but it doesn't mean we have to be. And I think you have to sometimes get over being the victim and really focus on how to come out of a situation well.
Gotta own it. You gotta own it. You gotta come out. You gotta be victorious. I also am a huge advocate. Don't be a victim. Don't be a victim. I hear victim mentality all the time. Right now we hear about everybody with their intrusive thoughts and all of that. You rise above that. And our Lord helps us rise above all of those things. Don't be a victim. You got to own it, and you got to rise above it. It's a good point.
And I think the one I'll leave it with is one I say a lot to our team, which is rule number one. If you're listening, you know what that is. Rule number one is trust no one. It is kind of like NCIS Gibbs rules, but they are different. And what I mean by that is, listen, we have to trust and believe. I trust and believe in Jesus, right? So, we have to trust and believe. But what I mean by that comment, why I say it is, you have to verify sometimes. You have to check the work to make sure people are doing what they say. Trust but verify is something that comes to mind a lot. And I think a lot of people like to just trust, hey, I gave this to this person, they're going to do it. Guess what? Everyone's not you, right? I wish they were. I wish every person followed up and followed through, but they don't. I hope what you take away from this is, if you're wanting to be a leader and you're just starting out, those are some things to think about. Sometimes you learn the most from the worst leaders. I'm not saying you should continue to work for them, but guess what? I've learned some of the things I would never do from the worst leaders in my life, and from some of the best leaders in my life, and some of the middle ground leaders. So I think, throughout your life, you're going to meet a bunch of different people. The way the first person you ever are reporting to leads doesn't mean that's the only leader out there. And sometimes you got to have that tough conversation to follow up. All right. Well, folks, thanks again for listening. You've listened to This Just In by the Justins. I'm Justin Young.
And I'm Justin Meyer.
And we're out. You just listened to This Just In.
And this is the Justins
Signing out.
This just in, gonna turn it all around. Whoa.